The Whole Foods in Georgetown was unusually crowded for a Tuesday evening. Karoline Leavitt stood in line at checkout lane 3, her basket containing the simple essentials, some organic vegetables, whole grain bread, and the herbal tea that helped her unwind after 18-hour days at the White House. Still in her navy suit from the day's press briefings, she looked tired but maintained the poised presence that had become her trademark. Ahead of her, an elderly woman was creating a small commotion. Dressed in a worn cardigan and faded floral dress, she was frantically searching through her purse as the checkout total glared from the screen, $47.83. "I'm so sorry," the woman said to the cashier, her voice trembling. "I know I had my wallet. I must have... Oh dear, I think I left it in my other purse." The cashier, a young man named Derek with multiple piercings and an expression of barely concealed annoyance, sighed loudly. "Mom, you're holding up the line. Can you step aside while you figure this out?" The elderly woman's face flushed with embarrassment. Her hands shook as she continued searching through her purse, pulling out tissues, medication bottles, and old receipts, but no wallet. "I'm so sorry. I just need these groceries. My grandchildren are coming to visit, and I promised them I'd make their favorite cookies." "Letty, I don't care about your grandchildren," Derek said coldly. "No money, no groceries." Next, the woman's eyes filled with tears. She began slowly removing items from her bags, trying to decide what she could live without. A bag of flour, eggs, butter. Each item she removed seemed to pain her more. Behind Karoline, other customers were growing impatient. A man in an expensive suit checked his Rolex ostentatiously. A woman with a toddler muttered something about old people holding everyone up. Karoline watched the elderly woman's humiliation with growing discomfort. She noticed the woman's wedding ring, a simple band that had been worn thin over decades. Her shoes were practical but worn, suggesting someone living on a fixed income. The medications in her purse looked expensive, the kind that drained retirement savings. As the woman reached for the chocolate chips, clearly the ingredient for those promised cookies, her hand trembled so badly she nearly dropped them. "That's enough," Karoline said, stepping forward. "I'll pay for her groceries." The entire checkout area fell silent. Derek looked at her skeptically. "All of it." "All of it," Karoline confirmed, already reaching for her credit card. "And put mine on the same transaction." The elderly woman turned, her eyes wide with surprise and embarrassment. "Oh no, dear, I couldn't possibly." "Please," Karoline said gently. "Let me help. We've all had days where we've forgotten our wallet." "But I don't even know you," the woman protested, though relief was evident in her eyes. "You don't need to know me." Karoline smiled. "Sometimes we just help each other. That's what makes us human." Derek shrugged and began re-scanning the items the woman had removed. The total came to $89.42 with both orders. Karoline swiped her card without hesitation. As they moved away from the checkout, the elderly woman grasped Karoline's hand. "Thank you so much. I'm Dorothy. Dorothy Mitchell. I promise I'll pay you back. If you give me your address." "There's no need," Karoline assured her. "Really, it's my pleasure." But Dorothy was studying her face now, recognition dawning. "Wed, I know you. You're Karoline Leavitt, the White House press secretary." Karoline nodded, suddenly hoping this wouldn't turn into a political confrontation. She'd had enough of those lately. "Yes, that's me." To her surprise, Dorothy smiled. "I watch your briefings. You handle those reporters with such grace. Though I must admit, I don't always agree with your administration's policies." Karoline laughed. "That's okay. We don't have to agree on politics to be kind to each other. Would you?" Dorothy hesitated. "Would you mind helping me to my car? These bags are a bit heavy for me, and I'm parked quite far away. My arthritis has been acting up." "Of course," Karoline said immediately, taking the heavier bags. As they walked through the parking lot, Dorothy moved slowly, each step careful and measured. "I used to walk these streets like I owned them," she said wistfully. "Time has a way of humbling us all." They reached an old Honda Civic, its paint faded but clean. As Karoline loaded the groceries into the trunk, Dorothy watched her with an unreadable expression. "You know," Dorothy said suddenly, "I wasn't always a forgetful old woman who can't pay for groceries. I would never think that." Karoline said sincerely, "We all have difficult days." Dorothy smiled sadly. "Difficult decades, more like. But you're right, we all need help sometimes. Even those of us who used to be the ones doing the helping." Something in her tone made Karoline pause. There was a weight to Dorothy's words, a history that seemed to press down on her thin shoulders. "Thank you again, dear," Dorothy said, getting into her car with some difficulty. "Your kindness means more than you know." As Karoline walked back to her own car, she felt good about the interaction. It was nice to have a positive encounter with someone who disagreed with her politics. Too often these days, everything devolved into partisan fighting. She thought nothing more of it until 3 days later, when her assistant Janet knocked on her office door at the White House. "Karoline, there's someone here to see you. Says her name is Dorothy Mitchell and that you'll remember her from Whole Foods." Karoline looked up from her briefing notes, surprised. "She came here, to the White House. She's at the visitor's entrance. Security cleared her, but they need your confirmation to let her in." Curious, Karoline agreed to see her. 15 minutes later, Dorothy was escorted to her office. But this wasn't the same woman from the grocery store. Gone was the worn cardigan and faded dress. Dorothy stood before her in an elegant suit, her gray hair perfectly styled, carrying herself with an authority Karoline hadn't noticed before. "Ms. Leavitt," Dorothy said, her voice stronger, more commanding. "Thank you for seeing me. I have something I need to tell you." Karoline gestured to a chair, increasingly intrigued. "Please sit. Is everything all right?" Dorothy sat, her posture perfect. "First, I want to return this." She pulled out an envelope and handed it to Karoline. Inside was $89B42 in cash. "Oh, that's not necessary." "Yes, it is," Dorothy interrupted. "Because I need you to understand something. I didn't forget my wallet that day." Karoline frowned. "I don't understand." Dorothy took a deep breath. "My name is Dorothy Mitchell Harrington. From 1995 to 2007, I was the United States Senator from Maryland. Before that, I was in the House of Representatives for 12 years. Karoline's eyes widened. Senator Harrington had been a legendary figure in Maryland politics, and known for her work on veterans affairs and healthcare reform. She had retired suddenly in 2007, citing health reasons, and had largely disappeared from public life. "Senator Harrington," Karoline breathed. "I had no idea. I studied your healthcare bill in college." Dorothy smiled sadly. "Most people don't recognize me anymore. Age and illness have a way of erasing us. But that's not why I'm here." She paused, seeming to gather herself. "I didn't forget my wallet that day. I had it with me, but it contained exactly 3.27. That's what I've been living on until my Social Security check comes next week." Karoline felt her heart sink. "Senator, I don't understand." "Your pension? Gone," Dorothy said simply. "My husband developed Alzheimer's 10 years ago. The good facilities, the ones that actually care for dementia patients with dignity, they cost everything we had. Every penny of savings, investments, my pension, his pension. I sold our house, our vacation home, everything." She continued, her voice steady but pain evident in her eyes. "He died 2 years ago. By then I was broke. The woman who once controlled millions in government budgets can't afford groceries. Ironic, isn't it? But surely there are programs, assistance." Dorothy laughed bitterly. "I'm too proud to apply. Can you imagine? Senator Harrington on food stamps. The newspapers would have a field day. Former senator can't manage money. So I live on Social Security, in a tiny apartment, pretending I'm fine." Karoline felt tears threatening. This woman had served her country for decades, had helped pass legislation that improved millions of lives, and now couldn't afford basic groceries. "Why are you telling me this?" Karoline asked softly. "Because of what you did," Dorothy said. "Not just paying for the groceries, but how you did it, with dignity, without making me feel small. Do you know how rare that is?" She leaned forward. "I've been invisible for years. Former colleagues walk past me on the street without recognizing me. When they do recognize me, they're so uncomfortable with my circumstances they pretend they haven't seen me. But you saw me as a person in need and helped without judgment." Karoline felt overwhelmed. "Senator, we need to help you. There must be something." "I didn't come here for charity," Dorothy said firmly. "I came here for 2 reasons. First, to thank you properly. And second, to share something I learned during my years of service that might help you." She pulled out a small, leather-bound notebook. "I kept notes during my time in the Senate. Not official records, personal observations about how things really work in this city. Who can be trusted, who can't. Which reporters are fair, which have agendas. The real power brokers, not the ones everyone sees." She handed the notebook to Karoline. "You're young, brilliant, but still learning the deeper games of Washington. This might help you navigate better." Karoline accepted the notebook reverently. Senator, I can't accept this without helping you in return. Dorothy stood. You already helped me. You reminded me that kindness still exists in this city. That's worth more than you know. Please, Karoline said, standing as well. Let me connect you with some discreet assistance programs. No media, no publicity. Just help from one American to another. Dorothy hesitated, her pride warring with her needs. I would appreciate that. The winters are getting harder. Over the next hour, Karoline made calls. She connected Dorothy with a private foundation that helped former government officials in need. Discreet, dignified assistance that wouldn't make headlines. She arranged for Dorothy's medical bills to be reviewed by a nonprofit that helped reduce healthcare costs for seniors. As Dorothy prepared to leave, she turned back to Karoline. Can I share one more thing? Something I learned after 24 years in politics. Of course, power is temporary. Party control shifts. Administrations change. But kindness, that echoes through generations. That young man at the grocery store will remember you standing up for an old woman. The other customers will remember that decency isn't partisan. And I'll remember that my life's work wasn't wasted, because it helped create a system where someone like you could rise to serve. She paused at the door. I didn't agree with your administration when I walked into that Whole Foods. I still don't agree with all of it. But I believe in you, Karoline Leavitt. Because you see people, not just politics. After Dorothy left, Karoline sat at her desk, paging through the notebook. It was filled with insights that would indeed prove invaluable. Which senators could be swayed on close votes, which lobbyists actually had influence versus those who just claimed to, how to read the subtle signals of Washington's power structure. But more than the practical advice, Karoline kept thinking about Dorothy's story. A woman who had wielded enormous power, now reduced to counting pennies for groceries. It was a reminder of how fragile success could be, how important compassion remained. That afternoon's press briefing was particularly contentious. Reporters hammered her about a controversial new policy, trying to trap her in contradictions. But Karoline found herself thinking of Dorothy's words about kindness echoing through generations. She answered with more patience than usual, seeing the reporters not as adversaries but as people doing their jobs. When Jim Acosta asked a particularly hostile question, instead of firing back with her usual sharp retort, she paused. Jim, I understand your concerns about this policy. Let me explain why we believe it will help the very people you're worried about. The briefing room dynamic shifted. Without the usual combativeness, reporters asked more substantive questions. The briefing ran longer than usual but was more productive than any in recent memory. Afterwards, April Ryan, a veteran correspondent who rarely had kind words for the administration, approached her. That was different today. Better. What changed? Karoline thought of Dorothy. I was reminded that we're all human beings trying to do our best. Sometimes we need to see past the politics to the people. Word of Karoline's kindness to Dorothy spread in unexpected ways. The young cashier, Derek, had been deeply affected by witnessing the interaction. He posted about it on social media without naming names. Saw a woman pay for an elderly lady's groceries today when she couldn't afford them. No cameras, no publicity, just kindness. Made me rethink how I treat people. The post went viral, with people sharing their own stories of unexpected kindness. Though Derek hadn't identified Karoline, enough people had been in the store to piece it together. Why Kindness Matters began trending, with stories of people helping each other across political divides. But the real impact came weeks later. Dorothy, with the help Karoline had arranged, was back on stable financial footing. She began volunteering at a food bank, using her organizational skills to improve their distribution system. One day she called Karoline. I wanted you to know what your kindness started, Dorothy said. I've been working with other former officials who fell on hard times. Did you know there are dozens of us? Former congressmen, ambassadors, senior staffers, people who gave their lives to service and ended up forgotten. She continued, excitement in her voice. We're forming a support network. Not just financial but emotional, reminding each other that our worth isn't in our former titles, but in our continued ability to contribute. Karoline was moved. That's wonderful, Senator. Just Dorothy now, she corrected gently. But here's the thing, we want to do more than just support each other. We want to help current officials like you understand the long view. Not partisan politics, but real governance. Would you be interested in an informal, bipartisan group of former officials who could offer advice? And so was born the Georgetown Kitchen Cabinet, as they informally called themselves. Former officials from both parties who met monthly to share wisdom with current office holders. Democrats and Republicans, former rivals, united by their shared experience of service and their desire to see the next generation succeed. Karoline attended when she could, listening to former Secretary of State James Baker debate Middle East policy with former Senator Ted Kennedy's chief of staff. Partisan differences remained, but they were discussed with respect born from mutual understanding of the burdens of leadership. The impact on Karoline's work was noticeable. Her briefings became less combative, more informative. She found ways to acknowledge the opposition's concerns while still advocating for administration policies. Reporters noted the change, with even hostile outlets acknowledging her growing effectiveness. One evening, after a particularly productive kitchen cabinet meeting, Dorothy pulled Karoline aside. "I've been watching your briefings. You're different now. Stronger but also kinder." "I had a good teacher," Karoline replied. Dorothy shook her head. "No, dear. You always had kindness in you. You just needed reminding that it wasn't weakness but strength. That moment in Whole Foods. You could have walked past like everyone else, but you didn't. That's who you are." Months later, when a young reporter aggressively questioned Karoline about administration policies affecting seniors, she thought of Dorothy. Instead of a defensive response, she said, "You're right to be concerned. Let me tell you about a former senator I know who struggled to buy groceries. Here's how our policies would help people like her." The reporter, expecting combat, was disarmed by the personal story. The exchange led to a more nuanced discussion of senior care policy that actually advanced understanding rather than deepening divisions. The notebook Dorothy had given Karoline proved invaluable, but not just for the political intelligence it contained. On the last page, Dorothy had written a personal note. "Karoline, power fades, but character endures. In my decades of service, I met presidents and kings, billionaires and power brokers. But the moment that restored my faith in public service was when a young woman saw an old lady struggling and chose compassion over convenience. Never forget that your greatest strength isn't your title or your platform, it's your heart. Use it wisely, Dorothy." Karoline kept the note in her desk drawer, reading it on difficult days when the partisan battles seemed overwhelming. It reminded her that beneath the politics and power plays, they were all just people trying to do their best. The Georgetown Kitchen Cabinet grew, becoming an unofficial institution in Washington. Former officials who had spent years fighting each other now collaborated to mentor the next generation. Dorothy, once invisible in her poverty, became its moral center, reminding ambitious young staffers that today's power was tomorrow's memory. A year later, at the White House Christmas party, Karoline spotted a familiar face. Dorothy was there as someone's guest, looking healthier and happier than she had in years. She wore an elegant dress and moved through the room with the confidence of someone who had rediscovered their purpose. "Senator." Karoline called out, then caught herself. "Dorothy." They embraced, and Dorothy whispered, "Thank you for seeing me when I was invisible. Thank you for reminding me to keep seeing people." Karoline whispered back. As they parted, a young staffer approached Dorothy, nervously asking for advice about a policy issue. Karoline watched as Dorothy mentored the young woman, passing on decades of wisdom with patience and grace. Later that evening, Karoline overheard two reporters talking. "Leavitt's different lately," one said. "Less combative, more effective. Wonder what changed." The other shrugged. "Maybe she just grew into the job." Karoline smiled to herself. They were wrong. She hadn't grown into the job. She had grown into herself, remembering that kindness and strength weren't opposites but partners. And it had all started with a simple decision to help someone buy groceries. Walking back to her office, Karoline passed the portrait gallery of former officials. She paused at an empty space and made a mental note to suggest adding photos of the forgotten servants, those who had given their all and faded into obscurity. Dorothy's portrait deserved to hang among them, not as a senator, but as a reminder that service continued long after the titles ended. Her phone buzzed with a text from Dorothy. "Watching your briefing today. You handled that difficult question about veterans' benefits beautifully. Proud of you." Karoline typed back, "Learned from the best. "Thank you for everything." "No, dear," came the reply. "Thank you for reminding an old woman that she still had something to offer. See you at next week's kitchen cabinet meeting. We're discussing healthcare reform. I have some thoughts." Karoline laughed, pocketing her phone. Dorothy had gone from counting pennies for groceries to shaping national healthcare discussions. All because of a moment of kindness in a checkout line. As she prepared for the next day's briefing, Karoline reflected on the lesson Dorothy had taught her. Washington was obsessed with power. Who had it? Who wanted it? Who was losing it? But real influence came from seeing people as human beings deserving of dignity and respect. The elderly woman struggling with groceries had turned out to be a former senator. But even if she hadn't been, even if she had been exactly what she appeared, a retiree on a fixed income who forgot her wallet, the kindness would have mattered just as much. That was the real lesson. Not that helping someone might pay dividends because they could turn out to be important, but that everyone was important, regardless of their current circumstances or former glory. Karoline looked at tomorrow's briefing topics: immigration, healthcare, economic policy. Each one affected millions of Dorothys. People who had contributed, were struggling, and deserved dignity. She would remember that as she spoke from the podium. The White House press secretary, who had once been known for her sharp tongue and quick comebacks, was evolving into something more, a voice for compassion and governance. And it had all started with the 89.42 worth of groceries and the decision to see a person in need rather than an inconvenience in line. Years later, when Karoline wrote her memoirs, she would dedicate a chapter to that moment in Whole Foods. Not because Dorothy turned out to be a former senator, but because it reminded her that public service wasn't about power, it was about people. And Dorothy, she lived another decade, spending her final years mentoring young public servants, sharing the wisdom of her experience, and never forgetting the young woman who had seen her when she was invisible. When she passed, her obituary mentioned her Senate service, her legislative achievements, and her policy contributions. But those who knew her best remembered her for the Georgetown kitchen cabinet and the way she turned personal struggle into collective wisdom. At her funeral, Karoline delivered a eulogy. "Senator Harrington taught me that kindness is never wasted, that everyone has dignity regardless of their circumstances, and that true leadership sees people, not just politics. She was invisible when I met her, but she helped me see more clearly than anyone else ever has." The funeral was attended by hundreds current and former officials from both parties, young staffers she had mentored, and ordinary citizens whose lives she had touched. They mourned not just a former senator, but a woman who had shown that grace could transcend politics. In the end, Dorothy's legacy wasn't the bills she had passed or the votes she had cast. It was the reminder that in a city obsessed with power, the most powerful act could be the simplest: seeing someone in need and choosing to help. And Karoline, she carried that lesson through her career, long after she left the White House, whether as press secretary, in private sector leadership, or eventual public service. She remembered the woman in the grocery line who had taught her that true strength lay not in winning arguments, but in lifting others up. The Georgetown kitchen cabinet continued for years, its bipartisan membership proving that wisdom transcended party lines. And every meeting began with Dorothy's words, carved into a small plaque: "Power fades, but kindness echoes through generations." All because one busy Tuesday evening, a young press secretary chose to pay for an elderly woman's groceries, never knowing she was saving not just a former senator, but rediscovering the heart of public service itself.